Hi, this is Dr. K. It's about 10 after 7, 12 after 7, and hopefully um, it's just that nobody needed to show up tonight because there aren't any students here, but I am happy to just run through the slides very quickly. It's possible that I was on the wrong meeting. My last student from fall semester just finished up yesterday. And so I have had two PRM689s open and working. And hopefully I wasn't in the wrong one right away at 7, or at 8 o'clock your time, Central. But if I was, I apologize for that. So welcome to week 2. This week, in week 1, we talked about the project environment and needs analysis. Everybody got their paper turned in. Everything looked good on the discussion board. You've worked a lot more on deciding what to write, selecting significant topics, and then supporting those topics from sources. And I saw some very good sources. One of the things about the project environment is that it gives you that opportunity to bring in some industry, not project management industry, but for example, if you're doing a healthcare project, to bring in some healthcare, or if you're doing a construction project, to bring in some sources that talk about construction. So week 1 and done. Going into week 2, there are 2 knowledge areas. One is project stakeholder management and the other is project scope management. And the skills that we really want to work on this week are organizing your paper so that everything kind of flows, and then APA formatting. So there are multiple processes in project scope management. And I think the thing that we need to point out is that it's important for you to kind of talk about which process you're in. For example, if you are talking about how you had a JAD meeting to get together and figure out all of the software requirements that would be needed by users, talk about that as you would within collect requirements, and kind of refer back to that process a little bit so that we really know that you know where to situate yourself within the PMI framework. The other thing, and obviously you do not need to do every process. One thing I would warn you about in plan scope management, that's not actually planning the scope. That's planning how you're going to plan and monitor and control the scope. So it's really talking about, are there any organizational or PMO boundaries on how you go about working on scope, and are there definite processes for how you're going to validate and control scope. So those are the things that in 5.1 plan scope management, you'd be talking about, not coming up with a work breakdown structure. So that's what I mean by making sure that you're kind of situating yourself within those processes without talking about them onesie-twosie. So the other thing here we have is project stakeholder management. And the interesting thing about that is that it's, we've done in our classes so much about identifying stakeholders. But we've even done a little bit about planning stakeholder management, where we say, okay, this is where they are starting out, and this is where I'd like to be by the end of the project, and this is how I'm going to get them to move from, available to engaged or whatever it is. And then in executing, you're actually, how are you actively, and this is not communicating, this is executing, manage stakeholders. How are you really looking at those stakeholders, figuring out, are you meeting their expectations or are you not? And if you're not, what are you going to do about it? And then monitoring stakeholder engagement, also making sure that you're taking account of where your stakeholders are and on an ongoing basis, making sure that they're monitored. So the next thing I'd like to talk about quickly are things to avoid. One of the pieces that has been a part of PMI for sort of forever. Everybody's talked about the iron triangle or the triple constraint. And there are many, many sources out there that will say that that's an outdated concept because if all you're worried about is scope, budget, and schedule, that means that you're not managing risk and quality and resources. And it's entirely possible to set baselines for those elements as well. And so you need to manage against all of your baselines, not just the triple constraint. Another thing to avoid is skimming over too many topics. Because if you look at 7 scope and 4 stakeholder processes times 3 inputs, outputs, tools, and techniques, that's 33 topics. And as we found out during week 1, it's really more important to stay in 4, 5, 6, maximum of 8 topics over those 2 elements. And give good examples. Another thing to avoid is using the future tense. The project will be executed, the project will be controlled, because we're supposed to be using that retrospective where we're looking back and saying it was done. So here's another funny thing, the royal we. It's okay to say, I described, I planned, I did all of these things. And it's okay to say we when you're talking about you and the team. But the royal we, in this paper, we will explain how work breakdown structures are done. Doesn't work because there aren't we, a whole bunch of authors. There's just you. So don't use that royal we. And next, there's using present tense in citation. PMI states. And PMI goes on talking and talking. There's framework, there's all sorts of different books, but really what you're saying is, in this particular book, PMI said this. Whether or not it's a direct quote, you really want to be able to say, I am using the concept in the same way that PMI used it in this particular edition of this particular book, or this particular published date of this particular book. And that's why we're always referring back. They said, they stated, they interpreted. It's always past tense, not present. So today we'd like you to do a brief, this week, a brief voice thread presentation. Just click through the link to the classroom and make sure that you're in the classroom so that we can find you and we can actually see your presentation. And then in settings, remember to automatically forward to the next slide. This is in your voice thread settings. And so that we don't have to click from slide to slide to make it go forward when we replay it. The other thing is that you don't need to use VoiceThread if you'd prefer to use Screencast-O-Matic. Use whatever you want, but make sure that you give us a link that we can actually go in and review your presentation. In this presentation, about 60% of it is the topic. Are you talking about your project scenario in a specific way with good examples? Are you basing your concepts on sources? Is it well organized? Can we follow what you're saying? And, is it professional looking? And I'm not sure that the points are exactly right for what's in the current class that may not agree. So let's talk a little bit about the scoring for weeks 1 through 7. You're going to get information from me for feedback from week 1. And there's a very specific rubric and there's a lot of information behind each of these points. But I do evaluate each paper based on whether you're performing or excelling or developing in each of these 5 areas. And in terms of excelling, that one in purpose, probably the top 1 or 2 people in the class might get excelling. So don't expect to get excelling every time for whatever you write. It really means that you've gone above and beyond for that. And so papers are a maximum of 20 points. 19 points is still an A, so don't panic. It just may not mean that you that week were one of the top 1 or 2 students. So that's it. Do put your questions up and ask the instructor forum. In resources below week 8, there are there's a wiki with information, and I'm always available by email or by text. Just don't leave me a voicemail because I'm still not getting those on my phone. I'm getting a new phone soon. Hopefully that'll fix that problem. Let me know if you're having concerns or questions or anything, and I look forward to working with you and learning with you this semester.